Brewster here, new episode of Soloing Secrets. This is Brian May, and of course we're going to be talking about the band Queen again. I've had lots of requests to feature more Queen's music and ideas from Brian, and you can definitely find a Chordplay episode devoted to the band Queen, and also Brian makes an appearance in the Harmonizing The Guitar episode of Brewster's Millions of Rants, on my channel. And really, what could I say about Brian that hasn't been said, thousands if not tens of thousands of times? He's a complete pioneer of the electric guitar, rock guitar, blending elements of, classical and rock and funk and rockabilly and all these different styles, a little bit of jazz, using effects, delay, and harmonizing the guitar and all these things, in his style, which is just revolutionary and very inspiring too. So we're going to do a deep dive, and technically Brian's been on the scene since 1963, and he's been reshaping the guitar ever since. So here we go. So much like the other players we've looked at in the Soloing Secrets series, we're going to do a deep dive with Brian May and look at some of the habits and things that he likes to do on the guitar. And whenever you do that, it's always a good idea to go back and look at their influences, the guitarists and musicians that inspired them when they were younger, because you'll usually find they carry those ideas and influences through their whole career. And here's an image with some of Brian May's musical influences. Since we're talking about Brian May, it's really important to remember that he's a pedalboard pioneer. He's one of those 70s, Pete Cornish pedalboard players, like David Gilmour and, a handful of other players. But those early, pioneers of using pedals and pedalboards on stage. And here's an image kind of revealing some of those secret pedalboards that Brian used back in the 70s. This episode is going to be a little bit different when compared to other episodes in the Soloing Secrets series, but let's be honest, Brian May is a very different type of guitarist, so I didn't want to focus on standard licks or bending, phrases that maybe we've already looked at. I wanted to dive a little bit deeper and really reveal some of those exciting, and interesting areas in Brian's style. And we're going to be looking at lots of different things in this episode. And I did pick, some solos and fills and licks from different songs from different albums. And I definitely went through, Queen's catalog. I didn't honestly dive too deep in Brian's, solo output, Starfleet project, and some of the solo material and stuff. I mainly stuck with Queen. And one thing that's really going to shake things up for a lot of players out there are these approaches to practicing scales. And that's one thing I learned from Queen and Brian May early on, back when I was a teenager, was instead of just practicing some boring, stale, scales and sequences, when I started working on Queen, I noticed Brian played, lots of scale, sequences and patterns, but they always sound alive. They always had this life and bounce and energy, where it was much more than just a basic, kind of generic scale. It really came to life, and that's one thing I'm going to focus on in this episode. But before we get started, here's an image with Brian May's Soloing Secrets. With the opening jam, that's really just a big swirling, delay-infused, Brian May kind of, jam-a-thon. It's not really a Queen song. It's not really even a Brian May solo. I just added a bunch of delay and played some Brian May isms, during that intro. And I'm going to break some of those things down near the end of this lesson. But just a heads up, that's not really something you can find on an album, even though Brian did do things like that live, during Queen concerts. But just a heads up, that's not really a Queen tune, but we are going to tap into some of those ideas later in the lesson. So here we go. The first lick comes from Tie Your Mother Down, and it's this blurry, kind of smeared bend idea that reminds me of Jeff Beck a little bit, but here's Brian doing this kind of thing. And it's something like this. Pretty basic, but one more time. Right there you can see we're grabbing D, C sharp, and then we're going to grab the C note, and you want to bend that up a half step to C sharp. So there's where the blurry part comes in right there. Because there's the D, C sharp, and then bend that C to C sharp. And then just end on that A note twice. You can definitely hear Jeff Beck doing stuff like that, but he usually does it on the lower strings. Right, and there we're doing it right there. Jeff always gets that kind of squawk kind of sound. And then Brian's doing... Now we could take that lick, we could move it down an octave, and that would sound more like Jeff Beck. We could also move it up an octave, and that would sound like whoever. And there you can see it's the same idea, just moved around in different octaves. That really kind of helps you flesh out, that lick in different places, and you can also move it to different keys or different, sets of strings or whatever. One more time, that smeary bending lick. The next lick comes from March of the Black Queen, and this also reveals some more of that Brian May kind of sneaky, note manipulation like this. One more time. So right there we're grabbing D and bending that to E, and then we're also doing this. Kind of bend and release, so you're bending to E and then going back to that D and then end on that C, and then you want to do that again but a little bit shorter, and then he starts doing D to C sharp. This definitely has kind of a classical influence. It's very basic, but it definitely has this kind of sneaky melodic figure happening. Comes down. You're hearing, different versions of the same notes. Sometimes they're bent, sometimes they're fretted, and you're hearing this kind of mixture. And once again, he's still kind of playing with the same thing that we had in Tie Your Mother Down. But he's doing it right here. Have to watch Brian, because he has all those little sneaky phrases and bends and shifts and all kinds of stuff in his music. Very expressive and very tasteful, even though it's very basic, but it is revealing some of his phrasing habits, with those single notes and bends and stuff like that in his music. Next up is a very famous section from the song Bicycle Race, and this is one of my favorite Queen songs and has been since I was a kid. And this is the song that really opened my eyes and ears to a totally different approach and way of practicing scales. And I definitely remember back then when I was a teenager, sitting in my room practicing scales, and it was always so boring and tedious. And I thought, man, there's got to be a different way to practice scales where I'm not going to fall asleep or get frustrated. And I remember working on some Queen music, and I saw, solos and some ideas. And I thought, hey, wait, Brian's playing like fragments of scales and some sequences there, but it had this energy and this bounce, this kind of playful sound. And it didn't sound boring and stiff, the way I was practicing scales up to that point. And definitely this section from the solo really opened my eyes, this part. And one more time. So right there, we're basically moving between D and A, as far as that beginning. So we're literally, you can hear Brian, he's actually overdubbing, in the studio. There's actually two guitars, kind of sharing this opening phrase. But you can play it all with just one guitar. You just won't be able to do a big slide the way that Brian does. But he's basically sliding from A up to that D. And that's definitely D major right there. So that A to D, and then just climb up one octave of D major right there. And then you're going to start on E and slide to this A, and then you're going to basically play a little fragment of A mixolydian. Because you're doing, and then answering that with, and you can see there's your G note right there, which is why it's mixolydian. And we're definitely just basically playing D major. But we're doing it, off of D and then changing the root to A right there. So that's going to change it from A major to where it's going to sound like A mixolydian. But spoiler alert, that's all the same scale, D Ionian or D major. All we change range where, the chords underneath it right there. And then you start hearing this crazy stuff. It's right there, it's D to E, and then that F sharp to G, and then D to E, F sharp to G, an octave higher. And then do it again right here. So you're doing like, that C, that B to C sharp, and then D sharp to E. And then that B to C sharp, D sharp to E again. So the same thing, it's kind of like a mirror image. And then the same thing down. And then you're doing this really cool like neighbor tone thing off of E. And then bend that E up to F sharp. It's kind of like a neighbor tone off of E5 right there. And that's just, D sharp to E, A sharp to B, D sharp to E, D sharp to E, and then bend that E to F sharp. And then one more time through that solo. Next up is this Frantic scale sequence from the song Jesus, and this is from the first Queen album, and it's something like this. One more time. And we're basically in A major right there. But he's starting on E. And we're just kind of making our way down. There's some legato, pull-offs and hammer-ons in there. And it's just crammed in there. And what I wanted you to do after you learn the lick, you can kind of see that little scale fragment right here. So I want you to practice it there. And then let's move down a shape and let's grab this. It's just kind of the next connecting area of that A major scale. So do it right here. It's the same sequence, just a different fingering combination using different notes, but the same kind of overall, pattern or sequence. You can do it again right here. And then you've got that whole step pattern, and right there you can do. You can see there we're practicing all of those different, fret hand fingering combinations. The whole step, and then the whole step, half step, and then the half step, whole step, and then the original phrase. For more of this frantic scale sequencing from Brian, check out the song Bohemian Rhapsody, and you can hear some timeless sequences like this. One more time. And right there you can see a little fragment of the scale. It's E flat major. Implied, but we're doing. One more time. These little flutters in there, right there, and then another one right there. So there's that fragment of the scale. So let's do the same thing we did earlier, but let's move back, to another position and grab that part of the scale and do the same sequence, but do it right here. Same thing. Just a different, series of notes. Let's do it again right there, that whole step pattern right here. But then that, sequence is going to translate something like that. stuff like that, where you just take one lick or a sequence, or it could be a pattern or something like that, and you turn it into some variations and expand it into some other areas or fretboard locations, groups of strings, keys, whatever. But just shake all that up and see what happens. Well, last but not least, we're going to take a look at some of Brian's pioneering use of delay, and this is very inspiring and interesting. It's so cool. And definitely in the studio, Brian would layer and record multiple guitar parts and create harmonies, like God Save the Queen from Night at the Opera. And I did break that down in the Harmonizing the Guitar episode, on the channel here. So if you want to learn more about harmonizing, check out my Brewster's Millions of Rants episode, Harmonizing the Guitar, and you can learn that opening of God Save the Queen, which is like 4-part harmony. But for this is using delay. And definitely, Brian would do this in the studio, in songs, but typically he would do it live, in concert. And he would play these extended guitar solos with delay, and he would create harmonies using delay. And I'm actually using a JHS Series 3 delay. It has up to 800 milliseconds of delay. You don't want to use an echo delay unit, like a carbon copy or something like that. You want to use digital delay, because you definitely want the repeats to line up like this. You want that really even and loud digital delay, because it's really important. You're going to be playing with those repeats and you're going to be harmonizing with them. So before I go any further, I want to make sure you have a digital delay. You don't want to use echo, because echo doesn't really do that. Where it's prominent and loud like that. I want to demonstrate what I'm talking about as far as using a delay pedal or a delay effect and then harmonizing with it. So this first example is really basic, but I want to show you how this is done. So I basically have the pedal set, and it doesn't have like a digital readout, so I'm guessing just by looking at the knob, it's somewhere around like 750 milliseconds, maybe 760. It's definitely on the upper end of the dial. It goes up to 800, but it's not max, so I'm guessing that somewhere around 750, 760 as far as milliseconds. And with that, you can hear the delay, and that's your tempo. You don't want to go any faster or slower than that. And then what I'm going to have you do, just play D, E, G, A over and over. Alright, now what I'm going to do is do that same pattern, and then you're going to move up here and you're going to basically harmonize in fifths. So we're going to do D, E, G, A, and then when that repeats with the delay, I'm going to play A, B, D, E like this. Right there, I'm harmonizing with myself. Right, you can probably hear those harmonies. Once I start combining and harmonizing those fifths, let's go up here, we're going to play an octave higher than where we started. So now we have 3 locations like this. Those delay repeats, and you're kind of harmonizing and swirling with yourself. You're literally harmonizing with yourself, but using delay. That sounds like a King Crimson or a Tool song, but that's kind of revealing, how you can harmonize using delay. So to give you a better view of what we're doing here, I'm actually going to play an E major arpeggio without delay, and then I'm going to do it again with delay. And I've actually seen Brian do this before, so this is a good example or demonstration. But we're just going to play an E major arpeggio right here. But I'm going to play it, one note at a time and add a little bit of vibrato like this. And then with delay, you'll hear it harmonize. Right? Let's do E minor. So just change G sharp to G, and you've got E minor. Change G to G sharp again. And that's really kind of giving you like a clearer view of what we're doing. we're basically just setting up a loop, you know, with the delay, and then we're harmonizing with that repeat right there. Here's another thing I did during that intro jam. It's pretty cool, and I'm really just kind of moving down. It's a partial scale, and it's like this. You know, really tasty. Reminds me of like Fly Like an Eagle from Steve Miller, because it has those weird, you know, kind of delay intro. And right there, I'm really just playing a partial scale. So there's, you know, G, F sharp, E, D to B, and then you're just moving that along. I think there's an A in there too, but it's basically, I guess you could think of that as like E minor with no sixth. You know, there's no C. Connecting with the delay right there. And that's really just one of those kind of outside the box weird things you can play around with, and you never know what might happen. You know, using your imagination and some creativity, you might stumble onto a new lick or a part of a solo or a riff or write an entire song, or who knows. But right there, I mean, you have to admit that sounds really different. It doesn't sound like something you typically hear a guitarist play. But there's Brian May's influence right there. Different, you know, guitarists don't, like I said, don't normally play things that sound like that. And you can just get lost in this delay world where you're, you know, kind of capturing yourself or getting lost in those repeats and swirls and all that stuff. So cool. That's going to wrap this episode of Soloing Secrets with this look at Brian May. And definitely, Brian is a legend, a pioneer of the electric guitar. I mean, he paved the way and opened doors for everybody that, you know, followed in his footsteps, which, let's face it, has been almost everybody has followed in Brian May's footsteps. Other players, of course, Jimmy Page and Clapton and people like that. But a lot of people seem to overlook Brian, you know, and I think it's the bells and the whistles and the harmony and the delay and all these, you know, studio secrets and live secrets. And I think people are just kind of baffled and they don't really understand, you know, that all of that actually is coming out of Brian's guitar. It's not sampled. It's not some digital thing. He's literally, you know, painstakingly, you know, manually creating these different effects and sounds and harmonies and all this stuff, which is so impressive and so inspiring and so different. You know, such a left field kind of player where he's not doing, I mean, sometimes he does like typical things, you know, like a crazy little thing called Love. That's kind of a standard, like, rockabilly kind of rock and roll solo. But then other songs, you know, I mean, literally, you name a Queen song, and he's taking chances. He's doing something very, you know, avant-garde or different or interesting or unusual. And I love that, you know, where you don't really get bored with his music because he's constantly reinventing himself and doing something different, which is so cool. So anyway, leave some feedback and comments. Please subscribe to Night Lessons, and I'll be back before you know it with more content and material. Thank you.